At this point, you should have already delved into the ideas of how to build atoms, chemical bonding, ionic bonds, covalent bonds. We have one more part to discuss. This is usually one of the most confusing parts, so hopefully I can move slow enough, and then when you come to the face-to-face chat, if there are further questions, we can discuss them. So what I want to do during this chat is to summarize the importance of water to life. It says live up there, should say life. What you want to do is be able to answer the questions in part 5 of the handout. We're going to focus on defining this term electronegativity, illustrate and describe a polar covalent bond, describe the properties of water, and just understand the characteristics that make water critical for sustaining life. So where I want to start is just in understanding that not all covalent bonds are created equal. They're not all the same. Covalent bonds, if we remember, is a sharing of electrons between two atoms. An example we went over looked at water. There's a sharing of electrons between the oxygen atom of water and the hydrogen atom of water. But now we can start to understand that this sharing doesn't always have to be equal. Start off just describing what this electronegativity means. Electronegativity is an atom's attraction or pull for shared electrons. You can kind of have an analogy to tug of war. If you have a very strong person playing tug of war with a very weak individual, the stronger person is going to pull that rope much harder. This is kind of what electronegativity refers to. The more electronegative an atom is, the stronger it pulls for these shared electrons. If you're pulling harder for these shared electrons, you're pulling those electrons closer to that atom. And when they pull those electrons closer, they become slightly negative charged. The atom that's losing those electrons becomes slightly positive. So you have this distribution of charge between the atoms of a covalent bond. When there's this distribution of charge, we call this a polar covalent bond, where we have unequal sharing of electrons. If you have bonds of the same atom, or those with similar electronegativities, do you think one pulls harder? This would be like two twins playing tug of war. Well, no, they're not going to pull harder, so these are called nonpolar covalent bonds. So these are two types of covalent bonds. Water, very, very importantly to us, exists as a polar covalent bond. So we're going to talk about that a little bit next. So we should have an understanding right now of a polar covalent bond is this unequal sharing of electrons. Polar covalent bonds. The atom pulling harder becomes slightly negative. We should always remember this. An example of a polar covalent bond is that bond between oxygen and hydrogen within a water molecule. Importantly, we remember that term electronegativity, the pull for electrons. Water has a much higher electronegativity. That means it pulls a lot harder for those electrons. That means that water is being held together by these polar covalent bonds, and oxygen attracts the shared electrons more strongly than hydrogen. Therefore, the oxygen atom of a water molecule becomes slightly negative charged. The hydrogen atom becomes slightly positively charged. So we can see those here. There's a distribution of charge that exists across this water molecule. We have to remember still what's holding that water molecule together itself is this polar covalent bond. We just have a charge distribution across the molecule. If you look at the bottom right, you see ethane. This is a molecule that is held together, a carbon and a carbon, or a carbon to a hydrogen. The white is the hydrogen, the black molecules, the black atoms are carbons. These are all relatively the same electronegativity, so there is no charge distribution. This is a nonpolar covalent bond and is a nonpolar molecule. So if two water molecules come near each other, so this is two separate, two distinct water molecules, that partial positive charge of one water molecule that exists on that hydrogen, remember, will attract to the negatively charged oxygen of the other water molecule. This attraction is what we refer to as a hydrogen bond. We call it a hydrogen bond because it usually involves a hydrogen atom, and that hydrogen atom almost always will have a positive charge. Water molecules are electrically polar and attracted to other polar molecules. In other words, it can be attracted to other water molecules. So because the positively charged region is always a hydrogen atom, the bond is called a hydrogen bond. Hopefully this is starting to make sense. This is now looking at a very weak bond. This is not as strong as a covalent bond, which is the strongest bond. It's not as strong as an ionic bond, but it is some attraction. If you ever filled up a glass of water and notice that when it gets to the top, you have this surface tension that holds the water molecules and it kind of forms over the top, doesn't spill out right away. These hydrogen bonds are holding those water molecules together and preventing it from spilling. As we look at the attraction between water molecules, so you can see right in the center here we have a individual water molecule. Remember, the oxygen and hydrogen of this water molecule is called a polar covalent bond, giving that water molecule partially negative charged at the oxygen and partially positive charge at the hydrogen. When an adjacent water molecule comes near this water molecule, there is an attraction between those opposite charges. Remember, opposites attract. So we have, looking at the second arrow, we have a hydrogen bond forming between two water molecules. These are weak interactions. In liquid water, these form and break within very short periods of time, within nanoseconds. But these weak interactions are what make water so critical to life. And that's kind of the cool idea. Water is so important to life because of this one simple idea. Oxygen pulls a little bit harder for electrons than hydrogen. It makes water do all those wonderful things that we know and love. So water, life-supporting properties. Water attracts to other water molecules. We call this cohesion. Cohesion is strong for water. That allows things like a water strider, this little insect you see, to be able to walk on water. Water is being held together. It's very useful in plants that depend on cohesion to bring water up from the soil all the way up and go against gravity and bring it up to the leaves and the taller upper parts of the plant. So water can move from the soil and can move up to other parts of the tree. So cohesion is this attraction between water molecules, and adhesion is an attraction between water molecules and other polar components. You should also be aware when you're running, you're out for a jog, you start to sweat. The idea of sweating is to cool our bodies. The reason sweating cools our bodies is because we have this film of water covering us and it evaporates. For water to evaporate, those hydrogen bonds must be broken. That takes energy. It actually takes the energy away from our body to break the hydrogen bonds and cools us. So that's an important property simply due to oxygen having a slightly stronger pull for electrons than hydrogen. So water resists changes in temperature just because of this hydrogen bonding property. Water also can exist as gas, liquid, and solid. We should know this. It's the winter time here in Wisconsin. We have this winter, and when we go out on a lake, we notice that we can walk on the ice. Because as water freezes, each water molecule forms a stable hydrogen bond with four neighbors. And when they form, it actually forms this structure that is less dense than liquid water, meaning it floats on top. So ice floats, which is an important property of water due to this hydrogen bonding. So you can see the difference in ice, the stable structure that's less dense than what you see on liquid water on the image on the right. So that is important to life. If water was less dense and ice was more dense, lakes would freeze from the bottom up and actually just kill all the life, destroy all the living components of a lake, ponds, or whatever you're looking at. And probably one of the most important characteristics, water is this quote unquote universal solvent. It's a solvent because it can dissolve solutes that are polar, like salt, like sodium and chloride ions. It can dissolve sugars, anything with these polar charges. We always say water and oil don't mix. The reason water and oil don't mix is oil is a non-polar molecule. It doesn't mix well with polar water. But anything that's polar, sugars, salt, these things will dissolve and water becomes a universal solvent. That's important because in our bodies, we have all of these reactions that need to occur, and it all occurs in solutions of water. So these molecules can react, these chemical reactions can occur.